Hello, hedgehogs and hammerheads. My name is TBSky, and I don't know about you, but I've had a fairly stressful forever, but also certainly a very stressful couple of days, and so I kind of don't want to be my usual critical self today. I don't want to nitpick things. I don't want to go through something point by point and talk about all the stuff I don't like about it. I don't want to, analyze things critically or deeply or come up with interesting opinions about anything. I just want to watch something nice that I enjoy and talk about some of the reasons why I enjoy it and what could possibly be better for that purpose than another episode of Sonic Mania Adventures. These little shorts are essentially a bit of promotional material being put out by Sega for Sonic Mania itself, a game that is already doing fantastically well. And while I loves me some Ghibli, I loves me some Disney, I loves me some Studio Laika, I love watching the cutting edge of animation being exploited fully by huge teams of immensely talented artists working with enormous budgets. I do love that. But something I love perhaps more than that is, well, stuff like this. Small pieces of animation telling small stories with, strict budgetary limitations. These things are not high budget productions. They don't have a ton of people working on them. They have a very limited run of episodes available to tell the stories that they want to tell. And beyond that, I would hazard a guess and say that they also have really limited budgets within which to tell them. They don't have tools available to them like voice acting or, entire orchestra to play the soundtrack. So, and it's one of my favorite things in the world to see really good artists do great work by constraining themselves to a certain set of limitations. And by the way, if you are an artist out there and if you want to really see how creative you can become, impose limitations on yourself. Give yourself some hard limits and see what you can do within that. Like, I'm gonna do a comic that only uses 3 colors. I'm going to draw a thing with only a Sharpie and I can't use my eraser. But like, that kind of stuff forces you to be clever and creative and think very specifically about how you can accomplish the thing you want, how you can make your vision as real as possible within the limitations that are available to you. And anyway, that's the whole, kind of bit of a wonky way to say that Sonic Mania is a series of very unambitious animation shorts. And I mean unambitious not in the sense that they're not trying to be good, but in the sense that this is not like the story of a clone hedgehog who was supposed to be the ultimate weapon growing up on a space colony, befriending a scientist's daughter and then being traumatized when that daughter happens to die or something, and then later teams up with another evil scientist who's the descendant of the first scientist in order to gather magical rocks from all over the world and then crash the space station into the Earth because of some reasons. There's none of that. There's no epicness. There's no grand scale. There's no huge battle for the fate of the universe. There's no none of that, really. It's just, there are some Chaos Emeralds, and then we have a bunch of characters interacting with each other in relation to those Chaos Emeralds. Like, Eggman wants the Chaos Emeralds, Sonic and Tails want to gather the Chaos Emeralds to protect them, and Knuckles just want to protect his damn Master Emerald, and Ray and Mighty just seem to kind of want to hang out and be friends and do stuff. But they also have a Chaos Emerald which Metal Sonic wants, and everything in the Sonic animated shorts kind of just flows from that. We all want this thing. How will the characters interact in order to get it? Which is part of what's on display here. Because notably, the way that this short resolves is not actually with a fight scene, but with an emotional standoff where something is told to us about the relationship between the characters who are in the piece. Anyway, let's just go back to the start and do this stuff from the beginning. Because, like I said, I really don't have the mental energy to be very structured today, so I hope you'll forgive me for, rambling more than usual. So, in the first shot here, they are cutting a little corner, and this is one of the things that I think I've talked about that before, that one of the things I love about seeing animation is seeing the corners that the artists cut and seeing the limitations that they work within. And because the thing you notice when you look at this opening shot a couple of times is that there really isn't actually, they're not drawing multiple frames. This paper isn't hand animated. They've taken a flat image and then they are distorting it with various effects, like essentially using a transform tool in Photoshop to create the illusion of movement without actually drawing more drawings to create the movement. And that is a very lazy way to get around the problem of how do we show that a character is walking while holding this piece of paper in their hands. It's a very lazy way to do it, but lazy, when it comes to animation, at least in my opinion, is not a criticism. It's not a derogatory. In animation, it's kind of about being lazy. It's kind of about finding the easiest solution to convey as much of the thing that you want to convey as possible. And this isn't an important shot. The important thing about this shot is telling us missing Mighty the Armadillo, and so that we know when we cut back to Ray, oh, okay, so that's who he's looking for, and that's what his emotional arc in this animation short is going to be about. He wants to find Ray, and he's certainly going to accomplish it. And here's where we start to see actual animation take place. And something I do enjoy about the Sonic Mania animated shorts is, again, like the subtlety that they... Because the thing about Sonic characters in general, with the they are defined in terms of their face by just having big-ass motherfucking eyes. Eyes that are so big that there's literally no division between them. Like, the eyes that are so big that they flow together like someone spilled an egg on a countertop. And that's a thing they've essentially copied from Disney. Take a look at the early character designs of a character like Mickey Mouse, for example. But what that does is that it makes the character tremendously expressive. See what's happening with Ray here. Just that little weird curve in his eye over here, that's enough to give him a sad expression. Like, that's literally that and a slightly downwards curved mouth. That is all it takes to give him kind of a sad, pensive, oh, I wish I could find my friend expression. And that's something you could have easily overdone. Like, it would have been so easy to go a little harder and really, like, give him the sad downward, probably the curvy eyes and the very sad mouth, because he's like, it's so easy to overdo that. And one of the things I appreciate about the Sonic Mania animation shorts is just how simple they really do a lot of things. Like this expression change here, like barely anything happens really. To have him go from looking at the paper to looking off to the distance, it's 2 frames. It's this, like, and again, because there's so little change from frame to frame, the motion actually becomes quite subtle, even though it is, like I said, the biggest pair of eyes you have ever seen in your entire goddamn life that make no physical sense whatsoever. And that's something that comes up a lot, especially in the other shorts, perhaps not so much in this one, but using the tremendous capacity that the characters have for expression without going overboard. And I talked about that at length, I think, in my analyses of the other shorts, is all the stuff that they do by just kind of twitching the eyes a little bit, by changing the expression just a little bit. And we're going to see some more of that happening later. But also take a look at this sequence. Look at Ray over here, right? That little move there, where he's kind of like... And then he does that. And it's just a tiny little expression change that leads into him going down and sort of being like, oh, if only I could find my friend. And again, it's fairly subtle character acting, to be honest, but I think it works so well. I think it's just so lovely to see, because again, they are so cartoony. These are just cartoony cartoon characters. This is why I said they borrow a lot from 1940s Disney, up to and including the spaghetti noodle arms, which are called rubber hose arms in animation terminology. A lot of what made original Sonic very compelling, at least to me, is all the stuff that they borrowed from the early days of Disney animation. And so I guess the thing I'm trying to get at here is that it would be so easy to be much more exaggerated when you're using characters like that. Like when you have these super simple, super cartoony characters, it would be so easy to over-exaggerate. And that's something that the animation shorts here have never really done. And by the way, notice this lovely little thing. Notice what Ray's tail does. When he hears a sound and he's surprised and he's about to look off. Look what the tail does. Boing. It's almost like a little exclamation point, right? It's like a little exclamation point that pops out of his ass as a marker of surprise. And that's just quite good. I also love this subtle little effect, like having Metal Sonic fade in, becoming a slightly lighter shade of blue amongst the black of the shadows there. That's also, first of all, because blue is a good indication of his connection to Sonic himself, and in fact, blue is also going to be part of his color scheme, and just as a visual way to introduce the characters, it's just a lovely little thing. I think I saw, yeah, again, look how little they really do in order to change his expression. And that's the power of having these giant ass eyes, is if you change the shape of the eyes even a little bit, or indeed a lot, as they do here with the eyes, then you can get a whole lot of expressiveness out of it without actually having to, you know, do a hell of a lot of complicated work. I also love the effects on, like, this is something that the team behind these shorts are just tremendously fond of, is effects like this. As the red eyes pop into view, so we get this white flash to start it off with, which transitions into these red sort of little color explosions kind of just flying out, which gives this real sense of impact to ving, like a robot that's powering on and it's about to kill something. It really gives us that sense. I also love when they need the character to move fast, right? Now, you'd think that, okay, if we want the character to move very fast and very suddenly, then the thing we should do is just go from one frame where he's there to one frame where he isn't there. That will make him move really powerfully and suddenly, right? Wrong. In fact, what you do is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 frames. Like, there's still just a little bit of him left. By the 7th frame, you do 8 frames essentially of anticipation in order to get him to go where he goes. And also notice that, like, this is classic anime effects, where essentially what these cross lines are, what this cross hatching is it's mimicking motion blur. That's what, when you look at anime and you see effects like this used to communicate speed, that's essentially what they're doing. They're mimicking motion blur. And the wonderfully effective thing about that is that you can use all of those speed lines to create impact. And one of the things I love is that, so the moment he begins his actual movement is here. Like this moment, when the camera zooms in a little bit and there's actual blur being put on the sides of the screen. This is where he begins his movement. And it's not until here that his eyes disappear, right? Like, all of this motion blurring stuff has been going on, but in order to keep our focus on the character, because you have a dark blue character against a completely black background, that can be kind of hard to focus in on as an audience. So in order to keep our focus and in order to remind us that this is a character who has eyes, who has a face, they keep the eyes on screen for as long as possible before finally completing the motion and finishing it off by essentially just kind of spawning rocks and debris in the wake of his takeoff. And here is where you think, okay, this is how you make something look sudden. You just spawn it without any lead-in. But in terms of creating the movement of the character so that it looks really powerful and sudden like that, there's actually quite a few frames that have to go into that. And again, look at how much they can do by just changing the shape of the eyes a little. Here he's got sort of an inquisitive, what's going on? Close the expression down as a lead into the big, wide, whoa! But notice how little the shape of the eyes really changes. They just go a little bit wider, but you get so much expression out of it. It's why it's so clever. And again, here, the effects that the team at Sonic Mania used. By the way, this episode right here, compared to the other episodes we've been looking at, I feel like this one got more of the budget. Like, I feel like in terms of when they were planning out the order and the amount of time that they were going to be spending on each of these animated shorts, this one got a big allocation in the overall budget for that, because as far as I can tell, at least, there's actually just a lot more frames of custom animation going on in general. For instance, here, when Metal Sonic cuts the piece of paper in half, you can see here they actually do bother to do a lot of custom animation for the paper to make it flap in the wind as this, slow motion Matrix bullet time scene resolves. And it's the same thing when it comes to, because in the other shorts, it feels like there would probably have been fewer frames between Ray entering the screen. They would probably have motion blurred it, really. They would have done like a motion smear in order to kind of sell this. Big fat Ray. And it feels like they just have more animation budget available in order to really create the movement of the characters. And here, by the way, is another lovely effect that I love. In order to make it like this really sudden turn of the head, like just so it looked completely like, wow, he just instantly snapped his head around. One of the things they do is they make the head vanish completely. There's just some speed lines here. Motion, like You can see it happen, like if he's looking away, it vanishes, and then it reappears with a little bit of a animation smear indicating that it's kind of settling into place, almost as though the speed with which he whipped his head around was enough to distort the physical shape of his head. And that's just, like, that little vanish is just such a clever sleight of hand, because it really does give the sensation of, right? It really does give you that feeling of something happening extremely quickly. And it's the same thing here. You can really see how they use the animation smears. And one of the clever things they do here, this is Metal Sonic, right? And we've talked at length about Sonic and the figure 8 shape. That's sort of kind of his visual trademark, what he does with his legs as he's running. But here it's being used differently. Here it's being used to indicate Metal Sonic rapidly swirling his body around to meet with his head. And they kind of pull off the same trick. You know, they vanish the head in order to give the appearance of sudden movement. Here they're going to vanish something else. The shoes. The red of the shoes, it becomes a smear, it vanishes, and then it reappears as he settles back into his new posture. So that essentially creates the same illusion that the feet are moving so fast that you can't even see them, in the same way that his head was moving so fast that you couldn't even see it. Right? You can kind of see how that works, that the disappearance and reappearance of the red kind of helps sell the power of that movement a lot. I also love how stiff he is. Like, he really does move very awkwardly, because he is a robot. So he's not really bending or stretching any parts of him. Every part of him still remains rigid. In every move he makes, like, every part of him is rigid. There's really not a lot of bending going on with him ever, because he's made of metal. He can't. And here again, a little bit of an animation smear. He leads with his forehead, which I quite like, and then vanish, and just leave the speed lines in order to give the impression of this super fast movement. And the clever thing is, because they lead with the head, right? You get this moment, just this moment of impression that he's being stretched out. And that's part of what sells the suddenness, right? That makes it look like he's actually leaning into the motion and moving, rather than just disappearing and leaving some lines behind in his wake. And of course, they also sell it by having camera shake and blur going on. This is a lovely little motion. See, the thing that, if I'm thinking about animating Sonic characters, one of the things that just is gonna be on my nerves is the giant-ass hands that these goddamn dudes have. Like, just these giant-ass mother-frickin' shovel hands. And moving those around in a way that makes sense for the characters, that feels like it's probably quite a lot of a challenge, but they manage it really nicely here. Like, that's a relatively subtle move that they're doing here with Ray, and they manage it really nicely without making the hands look clumsy. That's the thing, is that when you have something that's so much bigger than it's, air quotes, supposed to be in relation to the rest of the character, moving it around in a way that feels natural, that's really hard to do. That's really hard to pull off. And also another clever little thing here, they sell the power of the impact of Metal Sonic's claws on Ray by just having these little bits of rock floating in the air, almost as though like they're bits of something that has broken off his claws, or stuff that's been torn out of Mighty's back, just hanging in there. And that's how, when you have this freeze frame moment, which is what this is a freeze frame moment, kind of to sell the impact of the power of Metal Sonic's hit on Mighty, and thereby sell the power of Mighty's defenses, just by having that little debris hanging in there. Because otherwise, like, without the debris to kind of tell us that, okay, something has been thrown up in the air by some force recently, what you'd get would just be those two guys kind of posing vaguely, as though he had stopped before actually attacking. So that's quite a good way to do it. And again, like, very little work being done, but still selling a substantial expression. I also love Now, this is a technique, by the way, if you watch online YouTube animators like The Odd Ones Out or Jaden Animations or Let Me Explain Studios, one of the things you'll see them do often is a little squash and stretch to lead into emotion in order to make it feel like it pops a little bit more, like it bounces a little bit more. And it's exactly the same thing that's going on here. As you can see, it's not just that he opens his mouth and smiles and opens his eyes a little bit wider and goes, "Hey, it's my friend." It's that he clenches his entire face down. He almost like compresses it like a spring, and then it bounces open. Whee, my friend. And that's essentially the same technique as you'll see a lot of the YouTube animator crowd use to sell the motion of what they're doing. In fact, especially The Odd Ones Out uses the basic technique that underlies that little expression change as well for selling a lot of the motion on his animations. And again, like, that's the thing, is just, this is so simple. Like, I could do this. This is not, the expression change here is about as simple as you could possibly do that, but it works so very well. And it works really well that they have his eyes tracking the rock as it rises. And I also love this little effect. This is quite clever, because they spin, right? So Mighty is lifting the rock in order to hit Metal Sonic with it. So how do we get it from being him reaching over Ray's head and picking it up to being something that he's swinging over his shoulder and getting the illusion that he's swinging it to hit Metal Sonic? Well, we just literally spin the image and do a lot of motion where you can see the hand moving up in a circle there. And then we zoom out, and then you get that sensation that Ray has just beamed Metal Sonic over the face with a giant-ass rock. And you also get the little light trails from Metal Sonic's eyes that tell you that wherever, like, his head used to occupy a position somewhere along the curve in this direction. That's where his head used to be, but it is over here now because it has just been hit by a giant freaking rock. I also love the little slide here. He enters the frame, and again, take a look at how stiff Metal Sonic is all the time. Stiff. He doesn't really bend. He doesn't deform. He doesn't morph if they can help it at all. He's always very stiff. And so when he lands, see, it goes into the slide there. There's really no deforming of him. He just kind of comes to a stop like a train car. And then again, clever little flash to black, do a little bit of animation of visual effects, and you can sell the idea that Ray has just thrown a giant boulder at his head. But also, because the hit is not more impactful than just that flash frame, it also sells the idea that, okay, it probably hurts, but it's not enough to take him out. It's not enough to destroy him or, you know, properly take care of him. Okay, what's that movement? Do we have any good animation smears? Yes! Oh, as you may remember, I love animation smears, and this is just a really good one. Look at that. This turns into a worm. Whoop. 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 It's just quite nice. And I also like the follow-through on the motion. You can see as Ray attaches himself, look at his legs dangling. Just dangling a little bit as he's hanging off Mighty. And even though the two characters are practically the same size, like there's very little size difference between them really, because you get that little moment of Ray kind of dangling off Mighty, it really does sell the idea that this is older brother and little brother. Like that's the kind of relationship that's going on there. That Ray hero worships Mighty a little bit, but they also have this kind of close family connection almost. And that's being sold just by doing that little affectation of him hanging off his friend. Like a grateful sibling clinging to their older sibling's legs, right? And again, animation smear. Loves me some animation smears. How do we get Ray from hanging off Mighty to going over here? Animation smear. And also just the expression that he lands with. Remember what I told you about the power of those big-ass eyes? Look what happens when you make them into really small-ass eyes. Look at that. That's just a really good look. That's just really nice. And you can see And again, this is something, if you want two characters to relate to each other, to feel like they have an emotional connection, to feel like they are getting along, essentially, have them mirror each other physically. And so see what Mighty does, as Ray goes into this little punchy thing. Ray mirrors Mighty by, if they mirror each other by placing their hands on their hips like so. And then, you know, Ray does one thing, and then Mighty adopts the exact same expression and does the exact same move, although with different consequences. But this is, like, in terms of if you need to convey something without sound, if you need to convey an emotional connection between two characters, having them imitate each other's action or respond by adopting similar postures or doing similar movements is a really good visual way to build the idea that they have a great affinity for each other, that they know each other very well, that they have a rapport, there's a relationship there. And again, a couple of important things, because this moment here, this whole thing of Mighty accidentally punching Ray down to the ground, is a moment that's meant to sell the idea that he's mighty, he has a lot of strength. But it also needs to not look like he's actually hurting Ray, like he's not actually damaging him. So the hit itself has virtually no impact whatsoever. It's like he just barely moves and taps him, because he's not actually putting any strength into it, he's just tapping him in kind of a casual way. But then once the hit lands, there's this impact animation and the camera shakes in order to really sell the power, and then it's just like, oops. And again, very, very small facial animations to kind of sell the change in mood. And then, oh, I fucked up real bad, oh no! That's just a nice little animation. Something that I've always found very hard when it comes to animation is believably having two characters interact with each other, because you have to keep in mind the center of gravity between them. Like when Mighty is helping up Ray, you have to remember what's the center of gravity between them. How is Mighty is essentially working as a pole with which Ray is pulling himself up in a certain extent, and just selling that physicality believably. I've never been able to do it, and I mean, I'm not a trained animator either, so maybe it's no surprise, but it's just, I love looking at little things like that and contemplating like all the difficult shit that an animator kind of has to know and learn in order to be able to do something so simple. There's just something about the way that when Metal Sonic's eyes begin to scan, you know, that you see that little glow, that just tiny subtle little glow of light around the scanning animation in his eyes. For me, there was something about that just reminds me so much of like 1980s and 90s sci-fi anime. That glow combined with these abstract, you know, geometric patterns, just for some reason, it made me think of Cowboy Bebop. I don't know why. Anyway, it's neither here nor there. And again, Metal Sonic doesn't have a face that can really emote. Right? He doesn't have a mouth. He doesn't really have eyebrows. Like, you can deform his eyes a little bit, but mostly in order to preserve the idea of him as a cold killer robot, you can't... How do you make this guy show emotion? Well, he's located his target, and so he does this. And that kind of gives him the impression of, I know what I must do. Like, it almost like a little moment of... Like, he's formulated a plan and he's about to put it into action. How do you show his determination? Well, just change the angle on his head a little bit. No change to the expression whatsoever. You just change the angle from which we view the character. And then my wonderful love, the animation smear, is back. And once again, notice just how much they try to keep the eye on screen for as long as possible. Same as his initial shot, like that initial moment when he first pops in and rushes at Ray. Here, too, they're trying to keep the eye on screen for as long as possible, just to keep us in mind of the character. And again, the eye appears really early, and then zips into place. And it's the same thing here. You can see his eye appears as one of the first things. And this is something I've talked about a lot on the channel before, is that one of the first things the human brain does when it looks at an image is it scans for faces. And the first part of a face it's going to scan for is the eyes. So this is one way to avoid confusion, like, in order to make the action clear, by having the eye on screen for as long as possible. And it's not like, it doesn't make a huge difference. It's not like, oh, this is the linchpin that makes the whole shot work. No, it works perfectly fine as it is. but it's just one of those little optimizations, essentially, that can help sell or ground the movement of an action. At least I think so. And again, this uses speed lines. You can see the shape is kind of being defined a little bit by the speed lines, and then you can kind of see how this part here kind of gets filled in and just moves over just a little bit as the color fills in, and you get these color streaks that sell the power of the impact. And you can see how Ray's head, as he gets punched, it deforms his head completely. And that, unlike the punch that Mighty gave him earlier, that's what really makes it feel like, whoa, holy crap, that hit him hard, actually. And then you can see this little animation smear that stays on the screen just for a little while to kind of sell the speed with which poor Ray is being catapulted in the other direction. And I also love the little timing trick. It's the moment Mighty closes his eyes is the moment Metal Sonic moves again. That's just a clever little bit of timing, that he moves the moment Mighty isn't looking, essentially. I have to say, I'm not that fond of the airbrush that they apparently employed to make him kind of look like he's turning into a fog there, but it works for the shot as it is. And again, it's not so much that he appears from any given direction in this shot. He kind of just turns up out of thin air. And here's that little bounce. Remember how I talked about, look, if you watch the odd ones out, look for how he uses that bounce in his videos, because it's very present. And again, the acting is just so good, because when Metal Sonic appears, he's not looking for Ray. He doesn't need to know where Ray is in order to catch him. He knows Ray is gonna be right where his hand wants him to be. He doesn't even have to look. And in fact, he doesn't look until after he's already caught what he was looking for. And then he takes this pose. And I'm not sure if it's intentional, but just for a moment, this bolt on the side of his faceplate just kind of looks like a smirk to me. It kind of looks like a haha, I outsmarted you kind of expression. Also because he's literally turning his back on Mighty, which is a you know, a motion of profound disrespect, honestly. And that's how you can really sell the attitude of even a character like Metal Sonic, which again, you can't change his expression, so you have to find another way to do it. Well, we do it just by giving him a lot of physical acting that tells us exactly what his attitude is towards things. That, like, when I see this sequence, I really do get the sense that Metal Sonic is arrogant. And again, here's another lovely little bit of subtlety. That little motion with the eye. Right? That's how he signals what he wants. I want the thing you keep there. And that's like, that's what I mean about working within limitations, right? You have a robot character like this who there's so much you can't do with him that you could do with any other character. There's so much you could do with the eyes, there's so much you could do with like deforming the character, there's so much you can do with the acting that just in any other character that isn't available to the robot. And so how do you solve the problem of making him communicative even in spite of being so stiff? And you can see it here again. Like, he's not even looking when he throws Ray back, because the only thing he cares about is the Chaos Emerald. Like, he doesn't give a shit about these two guys. He just cares about the Chaos Emerald. That's the only thing he wants. And so we display that by having him only look at the Chaos Emerald in this entire shot, because he doesn't care. And then there's this last little moment as he pops up into the air, and I do love the little bounce he gets as he settles into his floating motion. This looking down on you from above thing, which again sells the idea that Metal Sonic is ultimately really arrogant, a really arrogant character, which is really, just that can be really hard to do. Anyway, I think I've gone in circles a little bit in this particular episode of this show, and I'm gonna try not to repeat myself too much before we're ending it. But here again, these smears, I love them. Because they're just so good at, like, because there aren't that many frames. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 frames or so, but you get the sensation that he's spinning him around like 40 times or something. Like it. That's the feeling that you get, but they put in so little, like they use relatively limited tools to get there. And speaking of character acting, by the way, you see there's that figure 8, that connection between Metal Sonic and Sonic being kind of visually reinforced there. I also just love the bounciness of the characters as they're running. Something that would be easy to do with Sonic in particular when he's running is to just have him kind of move smoothly. Like, just kind of move without really interacting with the ground. But just by doing that little bit of bounciness to Sonic's motion, you really do get the sensation that he's running over rough ground. And that's just... There's just another little... perfectly sensible. And here comes Knuckles, still doing that ridiculous shouting dance from his last appearance in these animated shorts. Just kind of... It's just the character acting in these shorts is so good. This is what I love about them. This is what makes me so happy when watching these things. It's just that there's so much that isn't in here. There's so much they can't do in these animated shorts. There's so much that the budget doesn't allow, but the one thing you can always do, no matter what your animation budget is, the one thing you can always do if you have a good animator is sell the character, is sell the personality, the feeling, the emotionality of the characters that are in the scene. And that's ultimately, that's what I adore about animation. And breaking our streak a little bit, we are going to watch the post-credits scene for this thing, because there really isn't much, except it's setting up the final episode of the thing where Sonic and Mighty and Metal Sonic and Tails and everybody is finally gonna converge and fight over the Chaos Emeralds. And I have to assume that this is going to end with Sonic going supersonic and blasting Eggman into the stratosphere, or, you know, what the heck ever. Anyway, this was just... I've been able to de-stress quite wonderfully in this video. So thank you for, like, since you apparently stuck around this long, thank you for sticking around this long and watching me de-stress and just kind of work out some of my frustrations by gushing like a fanboy over some very simple online promotional animations that I just really enjoy. If you liked this video, there's a like button down below that you can click on, and, you know, you can also subscribe. Subscribing is good. Subscribing helps. It's very helpful to me. For those who've been asking, the Dark Souls video, yes, it's coming, but it takes a while. They are the slowest thing I could possibly produce because I am a very slow video editor and they require a lot of editing. They're coming. I'm working on it. It's just things have been a little rough. If you want to, you can also head on over to Patreon, where if you have any amount that you don't need per month that you can spare, and you don't mind me having it and using it to pay for ridiculous, frivolous expenses like food and rent and clothes and I don't know, water. Water is good. You should have water. Water is actually kind of important. Also, medicine. Medicine is really a good thing in general. I mean, I know that's a controversial statement, but medicine is... my opinion personally is the medicine is good. Good lord, I'm rambling. If you didn't like the video, that is of course perfectly fair as well. And if you can't contribute to the Patreon, don't ever feel bad about that. It's completely fine. There's a dislike button down below for those who were not so enthralled with watching me just fart around for half an hour talking about a 2-minute animation short. You can click on that if you want to. I'm just saying there's a non-zero chance that you're going to be attacked by an evil metal robot that wants all of your gemstones the moment you do. It's because, like, there's a little tracker inside, and when you click it, just all of the... Like, if there's an evil robot within 50 miles of where you are, they're probably going to know that you have gems, and they want those gems, so they're going to come and take them from you. And that's, you know, depending on how you feel about evil metal robots taking things from you, you know, might want to think twice. I'm a bit of a mess, but at least the world can't possibly get any worse. Thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful day.